Can you all see my screen?
Yes, yes, very much.
All right. So I'm going to talk to you all about infusing computational thinking in preschool, and all that I'm going to share is grounded in research. So I want to, at the very beginning, sort of turn your attention to that quote at the bottom, and because that is going to be the big idea, the through line in this talk. And since I'm going to talk about research, I want to start by acknowledging, just one moment, the slide isn't advancing. Okay, by acknowledging my collaborators across several institutions, and of course the US National Science Foundation, or NSF, right there in the middle, whose grants support my research. I want to especially acknowledge an ongoing research project in which I'm involved, which is about investigating the integration of computational thinking into preschool mathematics and science, that I'm working on in collaboration with Digital Promise and SRI International. And so here's a quick roadmap of what we'll be covering. I'll start with the why, then I'll move on to the what, talk about research findings, and finally the how. And I find that the why is always the most important question to answer at the very outset, because it usually determines the what and the how. So in true constructivist tradition, let's start in a familiar place for all of us. So this is a thought exercise. Take a few seconds to mull on this question: how much has our world changed since the year 2000? And the reason I choose the year 2000 is because, of course, it was the turn of the century, the start of the 21st century, and it's also 18 years ago. And 18 years from now is when the children who are in preschool today will be entering adulthood. And so I want the previous 18 years to serve as sort of a guide to imagine what life is going to be like in 2036. And to help you, here are a few pointers. There was no Google in 2000. The first YouTube video was posted in 2005. The first iPhone came out in 2007. There was no text messaging, no Wikipedia in the early 2000s. There was no kind of social media at all before 2005 or so. The human DNA had not been sequenced until about 2003, and its sequencing, which happened because of computational techniques, launched genomics, which is a whole new field of medicine. Indian Railways started their online bookings only in 2002. There were few to no shopping malls in India before 2005. There was no online retail in India before 2007. And of course, the beloved Aadhaar started only in 2009. So when you think about it, all this happened only in the last 10, 12 to 15 years. That's pretty staggering when you think of the impact each of these things is having on all of us on a day-to-day basis, no matter where we are, whether it's in India or anywhere in the world. And so what has been fueling all of this, or most of this? And if you say it was technology or computers and computing, you would be right. Computers and computer science, and computing is another word for computer science, has been crucial to progress and innovation in every single field of human endeavor. Think of any field, and it has changed unimaginably since computers arrived in the last 20 or 30 years. And it would be safe to say that technology advances, thanks to computer science, have fundamentally changed how we eat, live, shop, work, how we travel, entertain, communicate, participate, engage, innovate, archive and save memories and records. I mean, think for a moment how personal photography has changed, and how we don't just capture moments, but it's become our way of record keeping. What's the first thing we do when we come across an important document that we don't want to lose? We whip out a phone and click a photograph. We don't look for a safe place to keep it. Our safe place has become something else today. It's the cloud. And there are so many more changes that are on the horizon. And that are, already here. In fact, you may have heard of driverless cars, drones for delivery, smart home assistants, smart this, smart that, artificial intelligence in everything, robots. The list is endless. And these changes have happened to us not only as consumers, but all the professions too. I mean, take a moment to think about how the centuries old taxi economy changed almost overnight because of apps called Ola and Uber. It's absolutely mind boggling, right? And practically every single day, it feels like a new discipline is being born or a new industry is changing forever thanks to computing and computer science. And so, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or filmmaker or scientist or a designer or a politician, you need to, and actually, even much more so in the future, you will need to understand computing and how it works. And so clearly, we need to educate and prepare our kids to live and work and succeed in a world that will look unimaginably different from the one that we grew up in, and very different from the one that we live in even today. I mean, learning is not so much about facts anymore. More than what you have stored as, factual knowledge in your brain, it's about thinking, as Dilip said, about problems and problem solving, knowing where to look, how to proceed, how to question, how to independently deal with problems and challenges that the world presents. That's what education should cultivate. And this is true not just generally about thinking and problem solving, but more specifically about problem solving with computers and computing as our tools and our ally, because they're so pervasive. And so this is the idea that's essentially behind what people call 21st century skills, that's prompting education all over the world to shift the focus from teaching factual knowledge to ways of thinking, or what we sometimes call higher order thinking skills and problem solving. And so along with critical thinking, we have other life skills like collaboration and communication and creativity. And of course, there's a whole host of socio-emotional skills as well that children need to learn. And as I've been advocating, it's also critical that children are also able to learn computer science thinking or computational thinking, because, the future will not depend on knowledge of facts. It's going to depend on humans collaborating and communicating and designing work for computers to do. And so even though every child is not going to grow up to become a computer scientist, everyone will need to learn how not just to operate computers or work with computers, but also to problem solve with computing and know coding, no matter what field they're in. Just as we teach the foundations of mathematics and science and language arts to all children, no matter what they grow up to become or who they grow up to become, they're going to need these new skills related to computing for the world that will be dominated with computing and computing devices in every single field. So let's unpack for a moment now what we mean by all of this. So computational thinking is a thinking skill, and it's related to computer science. So that seems straightforward. The official definition, a lot of people have tried to define it in various ways. This is the Computer Science Teachers Association definition. It's a problem-solving methodology that brings the realm of computer science into other disciplines. And that's why other fields have changed so much because of computing. And so you solve problems so that they can be solved computationally. And more simply put, and especially for the preschool level, we have to go really down to the bare essentials. It's about drawing on concepts that are fundamental to computer science to solve problems. And so this acknowledgement that our children need to learn these new skills to thrive in this new world with pervasive computing has prompted a few things all over the world. Now, computer science, you may have heard, is being taught as a new subject, new STEM subject. STEM, as you all know, stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's sort of separate from, say, the language arts and social studies subjects. And this is being taught usually to older children. It started in high school a few years ago. It's now coming down into middle school and even elementary school. And it usually involves learning programming and coding. And it's also being integrated into other STEM subjects, and even not just STEM, but even other subjects like language arts. And we'll see, not so much in this talk, but that's for higher grades, how computing and computational thinking and coding is integrated into other subjects. So computational thinking is this disciplinary thinking skill, like mathematics thinking is for mathematics and scientific thinking is for science. It's a disciplinary thinking skill that comes from computer science, but it has relevance in many other fields and subjects. And most thinking skills, it's important to know, they all focus on problem solving. They all have a foundation in analytical thinking and logic. But of course, specific things are different by discipline. But the most crucial thing to realize is that thinking skills, and computational thinking is no exception, must be taught in context. You don't teach a separate course called critical thinking or a separate course called computational thinking. What you do is teach it integrated with other disciplines or in the context of computer science. So to recap, computer science is a STEM subject that's separate from math, science, and engineering that's being taught now. And computational thinking shares overlaps with other STEM thinking, but it has some unique elements. And those unique elements usually come from the fact that computers are involved when people talk about computational thinking. And coding and programming is about converting a solution into a program so that it can be run on a computer. It's a part of learning computer science. It's also a good way to learn and apply computational thinking. But it's important to remember that computational thinking is more than coding. So one way to think of it is that you always do computational thinking when you're doing coding, but you don't always have to be doing coding to do computational thinking. So computational thinking and foundational elements of it can be taught without coding. And that part is very crucial for preschool. It's very key because these are things, the foundational elements can be built without putting kids in front of a computer and making them do programming, which is a bit of a stretch if you ask me for 3-year-olds. So what are these fundamental elements that we are talking about? So for preschool, we could be just focusing on 3 main ones: algorithms, decomposing, pattern recognition, and abstraction. And some of these may sound familiar to you from mathematics. There's pattern recognition and problem decomposition in mathematics. There's abstraction, of course, both in science and mathematics. When you think about models or equations, those are abstraction of phenomena. Of course, algorithms is something much more specific to computer science. So here are the definitions. An algorithm is the precise set of steps to achieve a task or a goal. It has sequences, so it's a step-by-step procedure. So it has a sense of sequence. Some steps could be repeated, so there's repetition. There's sometimes branching based on some kind of if-then logic. If something is true, go in this direction, else go in this direction. And it can be encoded. It should be, encoding is a form of abstraction that should be taught to children whenever it's possible. But algorithms can be encoded as flowcharts or storyboards, anything that can represent a sequence. But algorithms can also finally be converted into programs that are run by computers. Problem decomposition is simple, breaking down a task into subtasks. Pattern recognition is also straightforward, spotting patterns. But as children grow older, part of CT is also computational thinking. I'm going to use the short form CT, by the way. So CT involves looking at similarities and patterns between problems when you're solving problems. That's similar to mathematics, how we ask children to think of a similar problem that they may have solved before. And abstraction is, of course, creating representations where you focus only on necessary detail and ignore unnecessary detail. For example, equations, they strip away a lot of the detail of the real world to, represent a phenomena. So CT for preschool is really about building, a solid base for future learning of coding and computing and computational thinking. At the preschool level, it's really, just as it's for most learning in preschool, you're really making a solid base for learning in school. And so, for example, recognizing the alphabet is a building block in preschool, which is a prerequisite for reading that's tackled in early learning. So next, we're going to look at a little bit of research, what research has to say about all of this. So I know there's a question that must be going through a lot of your minds, because I know that, from my experiences, people often ask, isn't early childhood, too early? Is it a good time to talk about complicated things like computational thinking? And so my answer to this, to you, is going to be in the form of a conditional. It's going to be a logical if then. If that answer is yes for maths and science, then it's a yes for CT. If children are able to do maths and science activities in preschool, they are ready for computational thinking as well. And of course, the answer I do know is yes. Research does say that STEM can happen in early years. And in fact, there's a lot of very good research that has been done in the last 30 years at the preschool level that has these findings, that children actually are very good scientists. They interrogate phenomena, they're curious, they ask all those why questions, they keep dropping that toy to see how it's going to fall and make that sound, even from when they're really little. They develop and test hypotheses, and they have intuitive theories. And of course, very crucial, play and exploration, guided play, child-led exploration, adults working with children to shape the learning experience through questions and interaction. These are key for developing STEM thinking. And I'm going to come back to this later. Again, hands-on STEM learning, it's not only more fun for children, but it's actually essential to help children make sense of things that are complex or abstract. Guided hands-on learning must have opportunities for self-directed exploration and inquiry. Language, so important. Growing vocabularies allow children to make sense of increasingly complex ideas, and it actually works both ways. STEM amplifies language, and children depend on language to develop STEM thinking. And questions are very important. Those interactions and conversations for adults to ask of children, and for children to ask of themselves and of adults, to guide that problem solving and thinking. And it also helps develop spatial reasoning. I don't know if you all are aware, I'm sure you must be, that spatial thinking has been shown to be a very strong predictor of STEM learning in future. For engineering and mathematics and science and even computer science, spatial thinking skills have been found to be very, very essential. And those are developed at these early stages. Reasoning through ideas, the abstract thinking can be developed at this age too. People say that you can't do much abstract work. Of course, that is true, but you can have children grapple with abstract ideas when challenged and supported to do so. Of course, mindset, and these things are, we are realizing how much more important these things, how much more important such things are. The seeds of that I can do it spirit should be sown early. Society isn't fair to all groups. Girls are sometimes treated differently to boys. You want early learning experiences to be such that they develop those positive self-image and associations with STEM and CS and engineering and all these kind of things related to computer science. And so CT for preschool is basically about building, building that solid foundation, or readiness as they call it, to learn and succeed in school and beyond. And think of it as planting the seeds of success, future success. Because how a child does in preschool in STEM subjects has been shown to strongly predict later academic success, and not just in STEM subjects. It affects everything. But how we do it, of course, does matter. It has to be guided by those ways that we saw in those slides just now, by what research says, not by drill and kill, not by overtaxing your children, not by killing their childhood. So if so CT in preschool should be about leveraging children's natural STEM abilities, their inquiry, their curiosity, their examining of cause and effect. It should be integrated into their natural everyday activities at school and even at home, and even, of course, in their play. It should be integrated into science and mathematics. And that's what I would personally be a strong proponent for, is to keep it all integrated at this level, at this age, and not teach it as a separate subject. Certainly, they're not learning computer science, and certainly they're not going to be creating computational solutions. So it's about building that foundation, and you want to do it in this integrated way. In fact, if you think about it, decomposing a problem, thinking logically about a sequence, recognizing patterns, examining cause and effect, trying to get things to work through trial and error. I mean, those are things I'm sure you'll have all seen your preschoolers do. Those are things that are part of, in fact, the reasoning and problem solving part of STEM readiness. And this I'm getting from the Head Start framework that is used in the United States. The pre-K mathematics and scientific inquiry framework talks about children doing observations, comparing, contrasting, questions, prediction, experiment, build, measure, sort, all kinds of fantastic verbs, which actually map very well to what we're talking about in computational thinking. In fact, in that research project that I'm doing right now that I referenced, we've actually found that several preschool activities map very naturally to certain CT elements, and we leverage those synergies in our design of activities. For example, comparing and contrasting, sorting, those are all examples of pattern recognition. Anytime you're categorizing and labeling things, you're doing an abstraction. When you're thinking about cause and effect, you're thinking logically of if-then scenarios. Anytime there's a sequence of steps where the children are sort of carrying out investigations or talking about a life cycle of a plant or a process, that has elements of algorithmic thinking there. And when patterns repeat and you abstract those and recognize the repeating pattern, that's again an example of abstraction. So there is a lot of synergy there. So it's not about children doing anything extra. It's about enhancing their existing math and science activities to include computational thinking. The other key thing from research is that young children can be introduced to powerful ideas related to computing and coding. And for this, I'm going to rewind to 1980. One of the fathers of computational thinking and programming and robotics for kids was Seymour Papert. And he had this to say about kids being given the opportunity to learn to program. And he said, of course, the children he was talking about was a little bit older, 4, 5 and above. So not that much older. They were kindergarten and up. And he said that when children program a computer, they acquire a sense of mastery over a piece of the most modern and powerful technology. And they establish this contact with the deepest ideas from science and mathematics and from the art of intellectual model building. And so what he was talking about was about empowering. It's not about a machine controlling children, but about children controlling a machine. And that's a very different equation. And Papert's work, in fact, demonstrated what wonders children can do when they're exposed to this form of thinking and problem solving with the right kind of tools. And his tool that he first developed was this programmable turtle that you see. And he found that kids, when they coded this turtle, they could make amazing connections to mathematics through these things what are called turtle geometry today, drawing of shapes and things like that. And though Papert's views have been alive for a long time, it's really all these tectonic changes that the world has seen since the turn of the century that had researchers, and especially one particular researcher I want to talk about, Jeanette Wing, who was very influential. And she argued with this term, she gave us this term in our vocabulary, computational thinking. She said, we have to introduce this to all children as we treat reading, writing, and arithmetic as fundamental. Computational thinking should be a fundamental skill for children in this day and age. And her writings have become a major force to push, CT into schools that we see today. But Papert's ideas of integration and integrating coding and computational thinking into math and science and other subjects are still considered very powerful ways to bring computational thinking to children and to enrich learning. And let's see what recent research has been saying about what children learn when they're talking, when they're coding. and whether they're coding tangible objects or software. And to be honest, most of this research has been done for ages 5 and up. It's a growing body of research for 3 and up, but there's much more for 5 and up at this point. So children learn that programming is about, a set of symbols or codes that represent actions. They recognize that their choices have an impact on what the object does or what's happening on the screen. They make that connection. They're able to use, actually this particular research was also with younger children. They're able to use sequence of programming blocks or cards and actions to represent complex behaviors. They're able to use logic and put things in a correct sequence. They realize that they don't have to be correct all the time, and that's so good. That's such a good thing that you can inculcate in children, that fear of failure that happens in education. Coding there's so much failure, for everybody. You never get the solution right the first time, but it's okay to make mistakes, and you fix them and you have fun. You make connections with other subjects. Children learn to make patterns and shapes. But there is a caveat. For younger children, you want physical and tangible toys rather than working on screens. And so sometimes robotics involves programming in screens. That's less preferable, I would say, to doing, working with programmable objects that do not require screen time. And that's simply because of the age that we're talking about in preschool. So our last section, we're going to talk about, based on all these research findings and all that we've talked about, we're going to look at a few pedagogical ideas and concrete examples to build these skills. So the most important piece of pedagogical advice that I could give to you is this. You have to keep play at the center of everything in preschool. Most of the learning that we design for STEM and CT should therefore be embedded, because games and play are the most powerful and natural way in which children learn. And so, we can think of it as structured play or guided play if it's going to be designed with some sort of STEM activities, embedded in them. It has to be educational, engaging, entertaining, with opportunities for exploration. Additionally, you want to integrate activities in normal preschool formats, circle time, small group, hands-on activities. You want to use materials familiar to preschool children, so blocks, measuring tools, etc., activity mats. You want to integrate technology only in developmentally appropriate ways, and use analog or physical medium to the extent possible only when that is inadequate, and the digital brings something absolutely amazing and different to the table, then you sort of go to the digital. And all of this is specifically, I'm talking about these early learning years. And digital activities should spur, even digital activities should be such that they spur collaboration and support social interaction and foster adult mediation. This is very crucial. Children should not be given devices to be sitting alone and doing passive watching of things. Adult mediation, conversation, interaction, think aloud of what they're doing is very crucial, even if they're working on an iPad or a screen or, with some sort of digital activity. So we could be integrating CT into activities like, when we're teaching them process of, and of course I'm showing things like worksheets, but of course, these could be activities that are hands-on. So learning process or sequence in science, classification and sorting in science, sorting in maths, patterns in maths, cause and effect in science, building and construction activities. And one thing about cause and effect, we found that it actually maps very well to the if-then logic of coding and computational thinking. For example, the cause is it was raining, and the effect is we had to use umbrella. The if-then is if it's raining, we have to use our umbrella. Then we have to use our umbrella. So it maps very well to if-then logic. And of course, you could also be integrating into language arts where there are stories that have a certain sequence, and also art and music, etc. in preschool. And we'll see an example of that as well. So let's look at a few examples. A very popular example of algorithmic thinking is about finding a sequence of steps to get to a goal in a grid. And, for example, mouse to a cheese or whatever you can think of. And the solution can be encoded in form of these arrows. It can happen on a worksheet. It could happen on a floor. It could happen on an app. If it's, a digital app, there are apps like this. And it could also be integrated into language arts. In stories, several stories have this idea of a very, a very obvious sequence, like the Very Hungry Caterpillar story, where the caterpillar eats specific things on each different day and then goes on to become, a butterfly at the end. And these algorithms where you're drawing these, making these arrows and going, all of this is sort of an avatar of Pappert's turtle geometry. So when children come up with a solution where they're describing a sequence of steps to reach a goal, they're usually doing these CT things. They're coming up with an algorithm. Sometimes they break it down if it's a two-step thing, or if they find that they give their solution to somebody and the person enacts it and doesn't reach the goal, then they sort of go back and do debugging or whatever. But they're also doing these very key mathematics things in just this kind of activity. They're developing their spatial skills. They're developing visual spatial counting and spatial reasoning. And we've already talked about how important spatial skills are. They're doing counting. They could be counting their steps. They could be doing relations. If there are two ways to get to the goal, like we saw for the cheese, there could be several paths for the mouse to get to the cheese. Is one route shorter than the other? And they could be doing this relations, more than, less than, equal to. And of course, if they encode it like a sequence of arrows or whatever, they're working with symbols. And that's a form of encoding, and that's an early learning skill that is very crucial for children as well. It's a form of abstraction. So a few more examples. Here's examples of problem decomposition. Making breakfast, making a meal, you have these subtasks, of whatever it is you're making. And the important thing in problem decomposition is that it's not about just having a bunch of different steps to do a task. It's about thinking about a task which can be divided into subtasks, which themselves have sequences of steps or whatever. So it's about chunkifying. Look at this block structure on the right. If 2-3 children were to make this together, you might ask them, how would you break this thing down, break down this task and divide it up so that you all can each do some part of it? That is problem decomposition here. And what you want is for children themselves to come up with how they're going to decompose, rather than saying, okay, you make the turrets and you make the walls. So these activities lend themselves very well in classrooms to collaboration and group work, where groups of children can divvy up the subtasks, work on them separately, and then bring them back together. And task breakdown, in fact, is connected to this very important software engineering, computer science idea of modularity. But anyway, so like we said, these are sort of the foundations. This is how children start thinking about these things. And now patterns, of course. Patterns are everywhere in the world around us, so children should be attuned to those. They could be recognizing patterns on worksheets, and there are patterns that children may make themselves. And it's important, though, that as part of CT and computational thinking, that children recognize what that repeating unit is. What is it that is getting repeated? And at some age-appropriate time, they should start being able to abstract that pattern and structure and into some sort of an AB kind of sequence, because that's when you're able to see how patterns that look very different on the surface are structurally the same. For example, the scarf and the teddy bear are really the same pattern. They're the AAB pattern. So it doesn't matter. So AAB, so this is abstraction. You've stripped away the flowers and the teddy bear, and you've stripped it down to the structure of the pattern. And if children are able to see and recognize this, or if they're given a pattern like AAB and asked which of these patterns is sort of that same one as that, those are very important skills. And in fact, one research study that looked at what sort of math skills are predictive of future math success, patterning is actually one of those key preschool math skills that predicts math performance in later years. And perhaps it is about, because it is about abstraction, which is such a key skill for mathematics as well. When we are embedding math and CT into math and science activities, it's important to note the slight distinction about CT. CT is more about goal orientation. It's more about process, and it's more about creating representations and abstractions. And it is about certain kinds of questions. Like we said, STEM thinking is developed through good questions at that age. So it's about saying, yes, sort it. But the next question you could ask is, but sort for what kind of efficiency? What kind of, and we'll see an example of this. Why should we sort it? What is it going to help us with? What is repeating in this pattern? Can I abstract it? In this navigational route that we've come up with, the algorithm, are there alternatives? How can I encode this? How can I, tell this route to somebody else? It could be this way, that way, anything. It has to be a solution that can be encoded. Which algorithm is better? For what reason? I mean, is one route better than another when they come up with that algorithm set of steps? What if we change the sequence of steps? What if questions are very important in this kind of context? And of course, always making sure that they recognize that failure is part and parcel of the process, and debugging is to be expected. And reflection on process and representations is something that you want to do more when you're trying to make them develop computational thinking rather than just mathematical or scientific thinking. So let's look at another example in the context of sorting. So here's a unsorted set of blocks that kids could be learning to sort by color or by shape or by color and shape. But because CT has a goal orientation or problem solving orientation, integrating CT makes you go a step further and ask, what kind of sorting will help what kind of building task? For example, if I had to make this, what kind of sorting would help? It's not really all the bricks are the same shape, but different parts are of different colors. So you want them to be able to think about, if I sort it in this way, then it'll make building this task more efficient. Or what about this? If it's a heart of all colors, does it matter how I sort? But what if I want to make only a red heart? What if I want to make these towers, which are of different colors, but each tower is of the same size block? And similarly with this one. So you're pushing them to think about these kind of things. You're pushing them to think why they need to do that act of sorting, and how it's going to help in the problem solving. And CT activities can also be integrated in a whole host of other home or home-like activities that could be done in preschool. There's recipes which have sequence. Your child could be sitting in the kitchen with you, and you could be chatting about the sequence and problem decomposition in recipes. You could be talking about if, thens, and repeats. Bedtime routines have subtasks. How do you break it down? You brush your teeth, you change your clothes, you read a book or whatever. Each of them has specific things they do within them. Can you switch the sequence? Can you, for example, maybe it's not allowed to read the book before you brush your teeth. You have to brush your teeth and change your clothes before you get into bed and read the book or whatever. Sorting clothes in the cupboard, folding laundry. How do you organize by color? Why? If you're building some sort of tower out of blocks, are there patterns? Can you break down? As you can see now, these are all elements of CT that you're bringing into everyday natural activities of preschool learners. Okay, so far we've looked at all kinds of unplugged activities and non-digital activities, and that was for a reason. We want to avoid screen time for children, and that's preferable for little learners anyway. But at some point, given the fact that we do have these fantastic tools and the fact that it is about computing and computational thinking, you want to at some point introduce them to coding as well. And coding is actually a very fun way of applying CT, because it actually includes all those elements. Coding involves algorithms and patterns and problem decomposition. It sort of brings it all together really well. It's woven well. And since we know that they shouldn't be spending too much screen time, we do have programmable toys and objects that don't need to be programmed on a screen, but that can be done off screen. So these toys are tangible, which is very important. They involve play, inquiry in the physical world, which is important for children. They let children control the toy, and in that Peppertian sense, it's very empowering. It lends itself well to collaboration when children are sort of all on the floor, on all floors, on the floor, on all fours. And of course, it involves powerful ideas of computer science and computational thinking, input output as well, which is a part of computing programming, which should ideally be screen free. And sometimes robotic kits, etc., come with all these, lots of parts, and their kids have to assemble the robot. That has not shown to not be so good for little children, because children have issues with motor skills, snapping these things together, etc. And also it's just much harder, and it requires way too much scaffolding to make it worth the while at all at that age. Research has found that children can learn CT through programmable toys and objects. They learn and they understand sequence, algorithms, if-then logic. However, these toys, as we said, must be developmentally appropriate. They must encourage open-ended play. They must encourage integration of these CT kind of skills, the coding part, with art and music and math and literacy, and preferably it shouldn't involve coding on the screen, and preferably should not require construction, as we just said. And as it happens, I'm going to share a wonderful example of such a curriculum. Maybe you'll want to turn up the volume, Bhavin. I don't know if the sound, I'm going to turn up my volume. So it's an example of a curriculum that sort of brings all of this together in a wonderful way. Okay, what we saw in this video was a curriculum powered by the Pocky Turtle, designed and developed by a Stanford University inventor, Dr. David Zhu, who's founded the company Createch. And it involves cards for coding, which, as you saw, are sort of quote unquote fed to the turtle. And it comes with a lot of age appropriate curriculum, including combining coding with puzzle boards and activity maths. And as you saw, it blends logic and art and music with CT. It engages learners with all the things that they need to be engaging with at that age: color, music, puzzles, stories. It has an enormous curriculum that's aimed at grades 3 to 8, but divided by beginner, intermediate, advanced. It doesn't require screen time. It's unplugged. There's teacher PD. It's being used by thousands of schools worldwide. So great stuff, which sort of brings together all the things that I've sort of been talking about, because it really is learning through play. So in closing, All of this is about planting the seeds for future success and teaching kids how to think from a very early age. Um, and, you know, it's about harnessing little kids' natural curiosity, their inquiring minds, their why questions, their ability to, you know, explore, compare, examine cause and effect, and, you know, their unique ability to persist. In fact, some research has shown that the kind of scientific dispositions and mindsets that children have, it gets lost somewhere over the years. That a fifth grader, for example, doesn't display those same kind of dispositions that you want, that scientist kind of inquiring mind that these little children have. So you want to harness that. But CT can be embedded, of course, like we saw in preschool math, science, and other activities. You just have to extend activities to incorporate CT and make it more intentional. Sequencing activities for algorithmic thinking, cause-effect situations for if-then logic, recognizing and articulating subparts, not just sorting, but pushing kids to think about what kind of future search and retrieval is made convenient by that kind of sorting, recognizing patterns and creating abstractions, being systematic in fixing errors. I mean, of course, a well-designed curriculum and activities need to you know, be designed for this kind of stuff, but I gave you a taste for those, for how they're done. And, you know, school administration and teachers need to be aware of what CT is and leverage these opportunity spaces in their existing, you know, curricula and other everyday learning. So on this last point, I think it's very important that teachers be prepared and sound curricular materials are used. Administrators and teachers need to understand what CT is and is not, what it takes to bring it to the classroom. Schools need to have access to high quality, you know, learning and people to help, you know, children engage in CT. Teachers need to understand how and where they can make those connections between CT and everyday activities. They need to learn some introductory coding. They need to know it because, you know, as part of all of this, there, you know, coding is, you know, one of the ways to do it. And even if you're using an established curriculum, for example, like PokeTurtle, knowing coding yourself helps you help your children. And what's unusual about CT and computing, of course, is that we didn't grow up learning it. And so all of this is very new for teachers. And so they need to be supported and they have to be able to dedicate time to engage in CT integration. And so concrete steps wise, you know, I would suggest a two-stage process. One is, you know, build awareness and education, you know, PD for your promoters, school heads, teachers, whoever, through webinars, training, readings, examples, case studies. You know, educate yourself on what it is that you want to get into and introduce to your school, and then do some sort of a 12-month pilot or so with some clear goals. But I think it's important to start with small concrete steps to get teachers to become comfortable with this. It's new. It's a new thing for them. I mean, very often people start to do things, but it's not really CT. They think it is because they have not done it before and they don't know any better. So, you know, get them to understand and get them off the blocks, and then execute the pilot with academic, you know, some sort of trusted partner that's able to help you with curriculum and all the tools that you need. So I'm going to end my talk here. I'll close with a slide of my own children when they were preschoolers. It's a reminder to me of what preschool is all about. It's about play, it's about exploration, it's about fun, but it's also about guidance. It's about giving children the right kinds of toys and tools and opportunities, and you know, the role of adults in their lives to engage with them in ways that will lay the foundation for solid STEM learning and life. Thank you. That's the end of this keynote address, and those are the references that I have you know, drawn on when I have made those claims. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I guess, at this point. Oh, 1 second, I need to unmute you. Yeah, okay.
I said thank you for that excellent and brilliant presentation on how the natural curiosity and natural inquiry skills of children can be harnessed at a young age to develop logical thinking skills, which will hold them in good stead when they move higher on in school as well as in higher education.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I mean, absolutely brilliant. We all enjoyed it. And thank you for simplifying such a difficult subject and making such a brilliant case.
Thank you.
And it's question time now.
Okay.
I've summarized some questions which we've got on our Facebook and Twitter feeds.
Okay.
And I'm going to club two questions because they're technology related.
Okay.
The first one is, how much is too much technology and screen time for preschool children? And the second one is, increasingly, there's a lot of debate about young children interacting with robots.
Okay.
And there's a lot of, Alexa is everywhere. And there's a growing controversy, and a lot of educationists and psychologists say that children interacting with these smart robots is going to damage their cognitive and particularly emotional development and the human interaction skills. So what do you have to say about, and how does does this also interfere with that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the screen time question comes up often, and it's a question that every few years the American Pediatrics Association comes out with their guidelines, which are then sort of disseminated through people like Common Sense Media and everything that you all may be aware of. So I think the general guideline is that for children under 1.5 to 2 years of age, avoid all screen time. It should be all human interaction for the most part, and of course with
so zero screen time.
Well, for very young children, but for preschoolers, we're talking 3 to 5 age group. They do say that well, the guideline is they keep revising things, but they do say that 1 hour is good, not more than 1 hour, but they have now started to revise because good technology and digital, some research backed apps and tools have come out, which basically involve children working with an adult, sitting and interacting with a toy, with an app, with an adult, or that's really developmentally very appropriate, and it has been designed with children in mind and all of that. So those kinds of things, they say be judicious. You can increase the age. It's not a one size fits all as kids go from 3 to 5, and you can increase it by an hour or two, as long as what you are doing, what children are doing in that time is not passive watching. It should not be things that they could be doing with physical manipulatives. It should be something where the digital is really adding something. So for example, like coding, actual programming, you can't really have, an execution, unlike it's something like the programmable toy, like the Pocky Turtle or something like that. Software coding cannot happen outside of a screen. So you have to be judicious, and joint media attention and sitting with an adult, they say, is very key. Interaction when you are doing your digital activity too. So, but passive watching is a big no-no, and I know that happens a lot. So if children are watching an hour of TV, they're already done. Forget educational apps. So, and so the second question you asked, that's an interesting one, actually. So what we are talking here, and what Papa talked about, was programming the child, programming the machine, not interacting with an intelligent machine. And so I would say, the children
knows all the answers. Alexa knows all the answers.
Yeah, no, you don't want to be interacting with a programmed machine like that. I think you should keep children away from Alexa. I think personally, adults should also stay away from Alexa. I think that there are so many privacy issues related to these smart devices that are always listening in. But let's focus on the children for a moment. I think children should be interacting with humans to the extent possible, if there has to be a two-way interaction. And if it has to be with a machine, it should be in a sense of empowerment for the child. And that's why it's not about browsing and clicking and hearing answers from Alexa. It should be about the child programming something or whatever. So if it has to be machine interaction with a robot, it's what the child has programmed, not a programmed intelligent device. So my advice would be to keep Alexa away from classrooms and away from. There is no research yet that has shown anything beneficial coming out of it yet. So
thank you, thank you. Another very important question, which has come up, a lot of people have tweeted about, is how important is teacher training and preparation? Because in introducing, computational thinking in preschool, because already in India, there's a big teacher shortage and training crisis, particularly in early childhood education. And we're talking about introducing a subject like computational thinking, which requires, as you say, a lot of adult supervision and scaffolding. How important, how do you prepare our teachers to do this?
Yeah, I mean, if you can think for a moment, computational thinking has a lot of overlap, stay with other STEM learning. Could a teacher have, without knowing anything about maths or science, could they have taught those things to children? No, it's because they themselves know those subjects, have learned them. And of course, you have learned how to teach it to little children. So there's the pedagogical aspect of learning how to teach those subjects at that age level. Now, computational thinking has the added complication in some sense, that a lot of teachers have not experienced or learned computing and don't understand computational thinking. And so I think for those reasons, I think teacher training is absolutely crucial. I don't think that teachers should go in simply thinking, oh, it's pattern recognition, so let's do it. Because you have to, that goal, even when you're teaching mathematics, you have a goal of where you're trying to get your kids to, what that trajectory is in school. So if you understand a little bit about computational thinking for older children, what coding is, what computing is, then you can sort of guide that early learning experience in that direction. And there may be kids that may be going a little ahead. You have to be able to deal with all of that. So I think teacher training is, of course, very crucial. Yeah, I don't think it's wise at all to sort of just jump into it without some sort of knowledge and awareness. And I think it's for the teacher's own benefit as well. They want to be able to, be, of course, you don't always, with little children, you can get down on your fours and do some sort of discovery and exploration with them, but you don't want to be in the dark of where you're trying to lead the child. And so, yeah, I think teacher training is important.
Thank you so much, Shuchi. I wish we could continue this conversation, but I think we're already running out of time. Thank you so much for taking, on behalf of everyone here, we simply loved your presentation. Thank you for taking the time to be with us at the Education World Early Childhood Education Conference. And we're going to take a lot away from what you've just said, and hopefully begin to also implement, particularly about screen time and adult supervision.
Right. It was my pleasure. Thank you all so much. I wish everyone, all the participants, a wonderful conference, a wonderful rest of the day. I hope people are trickling in. If they've missed my talk, I guess, I think we've recorded it. So at some later time.
Yes, we've recorded it and we're going to make it available online. So this message goes to a larger audience.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you and good night. Yeah. I've